Last night. He's from Hebrew College. He works in the Center of Global Justice, and we are delighted that you are here with us. So, Or, come and talk with us, and then at the close of your time, if there's time, we'll take some questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you again. I'm going to just draw your attention to Jennifer, who is kindly helping to pass out the text sheets that I'm going to use for my presentation today. In addition to the physical copies in her hands, our trusty tech crew is going to display the texts on the two screens. So there are enough physical copies for every 2 or 3 people, and they've all been emailed to you as well. Jennifer did that during lunch, so you have them for your files. While Jennifer is distributing the text for those that want physical copies, just raise your hand and allow the rest of your bodies to join me in an opening song. We'll start just with the melody, and then the words to the song are on the screens, both in Hebrew and you can see the English translation. So this will be an exercise in multitasking. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. La, lai, 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 lai. Ai, lai, 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 lai. Ay, lai, 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 lai. Ay, lai, 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 lai. La, lai, 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 lai. One word. Shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Again, shalom, 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 shalom. Yehi shalom bechelech shaleva Be'aremenotayich Yehi shalom Bechelech Shaleva Be'aremenotayich. That one word again. Shalom, 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 shalom. Shalom, Shalom. Thank you. So this afternoon, I'd like to pick up where I left off last evening in my opening comments and try to the best of my ability also to weave together some of my comments in and around those that were made this morning by the first presenter. And the way that I want to do this together is through an exegetical journey. I want to share with you a series of texts that animate my thinking on the topics at hand as I understand them, and I hope that time will allow for some give and take. I also hope that the texts that you have before you, either on your phones or in your hands, can then be used in your discussion groups and for reflection and conversation over the course of the weekend and beyond. I want to draw your attention to the third text on the sheet or on the screen by Hans Kung. So we're going to allow the tech folks to catch up to us. There will be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. There will be no peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions. Taking my cue from Kung, I want to explore with you, as I said, exegetically, some of the theological and ethical contours of my own approach to the subject of religious pluralism and the pursuit of peace. And the place where I want to begin is where I left off last night, the book of the Zohar, because I explained it in short form, but at 9 o'clock at night, it's not easy to try and introduce an esoteric concept from medieval Spain. So I want to revisit it. And in some ways, it dovetails quite powerfully with what was said this morning by Rabbi. I want to return to that name, Elohim, that most common name in the Hebrew Bible, which, as I said last night, can be read as a composite. And the great mystics of the Zohar, the Book of Splendor from medieval Spain, invite us to look at that word again. They beckon us to read it deeply, to allow its configuration and its deconstruction to move us in terms of our spiritual consciousness. And so they say to us, as I said last night, read this word not simply as Elohim, as God, but read it as me and Ele, who and this or these. And as I said, to my mind, it's a very important statement about the theological enterprise, because at once it demands of us epistemological or intellectual humility before the surplus of the ultimate. And at the same time, the authors of the Zohar understood deeply that without theological language, as imperfect as it may be, our lives religiously would be impoverished. And so they encourage the creative use of language in order to try and name the insights that we gain as we walk through the world. Remember this morning, we began with 99 names. That's a part of a project, as I understand it, of theological creativity. We need to name, but we know that each of those names and all of those names do not capture reality in its fullest. Because, as the great theologian and social activist Abraham Joshua Heschel said, there is an ineffable reality that we participate in. whether you call it Harachaman, the merciful one, or Dayan, the judge, or Hamelech, the king, or Ma'ayan, the great well, all of those are a part of the bricolage of theological creativity that we're involved with and our ancestors have been involved with, naming those moments of great insight, which then lead to commitment. But again, hand in hand, the authors of the Zohar are saying to us, me and Eile. By the way, there's a very powerful proof text that they bring, because if you're going to engage in this kind of linguistic exercise in medieval Spain, and you are trained as a rabbinic scholar, it is more than likely that you're going to make a statement like this and then demonstrate that you have a textual link from the tradition. So the textual link that they use comes from the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus, chapter 32, verse 4. He took the gold from their hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into an image of a calf. This is not one of the great moments of spiritual exaltation in the Israelites' journey through the desert. This is the sin of the Israelites. This is the collective original sin, you might say, of the Israelites. The building of the golden calf. Now read or listen carefully. Then they said, Israel, this is your God, pointing at the calf or perhaps the small trinkets that the people fashioned with their gold, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Eile Elohecha Yisrael. The people of Israel demand of Aaron the high priest that he build a tactile God form. Moses has ascended the mountain. They are anxiety-ridden. Where has he gone? Will he come back? Who is this mysterious Yud-He Vav-He that has called him, has called us? We need something that we can take hold of. And so Aaron, pressed into duty, fashions this molten calf. Moses comes down the mountain and says, is this your God? Eile Elohecha Yisrael? Now, why do the authors of the Zohar centuries later invoke this verse? They do it because they're saying to us in very stark terms, perhaps you think that idolatry is a relic from the ancient world. No. We may not build molten calves, but we certainly engage in our own forms of idolatry regularly, whether it be physical or conceptual. So any time you say, Eile, this is God, without the accompanying me, you are returning to that moment in our ancient history of trying to limit and shape and control divinity. Whether it was in the ancient Near East, in medieval Spain, or in the 21st century in and around Lake Junaluska, right? The dangers of idolatry are real. And you can fill in the blanks, religious or secular. But I want to reiterate what Rabbi has said this morning so powerfully, among other very important words. We need to allow for the surplus of life. To use Paul Tillich expression, the God beyond God, me and Eile. That for me is the starting place, spiritually and intellectually, for the work of bridging, of trying to work together across the various divides, religious, cultural, and otherwise, for the pursuit of wholeness, shlemut, same root as shalom, for peace. I want to move us from that point to a second point. And that is the following. One of the ways in which the ancient Israelites and the Jewish people throughout our history have understood our place in the world is as an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. My name is Or because I was born on Hanukkah. And my parents, who are mystically inclined, loved that coincidence or providential event. And so they named me Or. In fact, my full name is Or Nistar, which I don't often use on the basketball court or when ordering coffee at Pete's. Or Nistar means hidden light. So my mother and two teachers in my life have called me by that full name. So the Jewish people has understood that it has a mission in the world. And that goes back to texts like the one you have before you from the book of Isaiah. I, Yud He Vav He, have called unto you in righteousness, and have taken hold of your hand, and submitted you as an Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations. When we enter into the interreligious sphere with the hope and the aspiration to live harmoniously, I think the question of universalism and particularism, including the question of chosenness, is one that we need to address. And the way that I would say it, as I do here, is I view myself as a member of a community that is a light unto the nations. There are many things that I think Judaism has to say to the world. We have real contributions to make. And I don't think that it's helpful to shy away from making those statements, on the one hand. On the other hand, we are a light among other lights. I want to reiterate the first point that I made from a wonderful quotation that you might know from Marianne Williamson. And you may have heard it, in fact, in the mouth of Nelson Mandela, because he used it more than once in his speeches. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us. It's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Williamson, of course, is focusing on the individual. But I want to bring this text to bear on the communal and on the interreligious. We all have gifts from our traditions to bring to bear to the great issues that face our world. One of the questions that I think would be interesting to ask yourselves in your discussion groups is, what are the resources from your spiritual community, from your tradition, that you think can be most helpful to you and possibly to others in the pursuit of peace? But it's not uncomplicated to say that, because so often in the histories of our traditions, it has been a zero-sum game. It has been a conversation that's riddled with polemics and triumphalism. But we also know clearly that we have learned from each other over the centuries. I'll give you one example from the Jewish tradition. Maimonides, perhaps the greatest Jewish intellectual in our history, read the Torah side by side with Greek philosophy. And he read those Greek philosophical treatises in Arabic. He also read very carefully the writings of his contemporaries, including other intellectuals from Muslim and Christian contexts. And then, of course, he was read by Muslims and Christians. So we know that there has been an exchange of ideas. We understand that people have adopted and adapted throughout the centuries. But because we have been locked into the struggle for supremacy, it hasn't allowed us to do it in a way in which we can maintain both that which is universal and particular. And we live in a time and place where that is more easily doable, but it has to be done carefully, thoughtfully. One other example that I want to share with you about this notion of a light among other lights from the contemporary world, which is very powerful to me. It comes from Abraham Joshua Heschel, whose name we've invoked more than once. In a private letter to Martin Luther King Jr., he wrote the following: "The day we marched together out of Selma was a day of sanctification. That day, I hope, will never be passed to me. That day will continue to be this day. May I add that I have rarely in my life been privileged to hear a sermon as glorious as the one you delivered at the service in Selma prior to the march." Those words would be remarkable enough if you didn't know anything about Abraham Joshua Heschel's journey. But here are a few important things. Heschel, as Phil said, was born into a Hasidic family in Warsaw, Poland in 1907. By the time he was 13, he was ordained as a rabbi. By 14 or 15, his interests wandered beyond the traditional curriculum of the yeshiva, and he became very interested in math and science and poetry and literature. And so he continued to develop, and he grew. Eventually, as a young adult, he went to the University of Berlin, where he also retrained as a modern rabbi at the Reform Seminary. In 1933, as he was completing his doctoral studies, Hitler came to power, and his life would change forever. In 1937, he was booted out of Germany, back to Poland. And then in 1939, after completing his doctorate under tremendous duress, he was given a special visa for scholars. A very limited number of these were issued. And he made his way to Cincinnati, where he taught at Hebrew Union College, and then to New York at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Given all that he experienced in terms of anti-Semitism, he could have come to this country and remained cloistered in one of those Jewish academic institutions and simply have written about the prophets. But instead, he made a different decision, which was to try to the best of his ability to embody the spirit of the prophets. When you think about the arc of that journey and what he says here, it's remarkable. In some sense, it makes perfect sense. He's experienced pain and suffering through bigotry and hatred, and so when he has the opportunity, he's going to stand forth with and for others, except that's not always how it works. Many times we know that people who have been oppressed are not necessarily in a position then to become activists and spokespersons for justice, compassion, peace, harmony. And so here, Heschel stands with Dr. King and says, as he does elsewhere, I'm not coming to give a handout. I'm coming because I can feel in a palpable way that there is tremendous spiritual power in this movement. In 1968, at Heschel's 65th birthday, the rabbis of the conservative movement celebrated him, and they asked who he wanted to be the guest speaker. It was Dr. King. When Heschel thanked Dr. King, he said of him, he is as close to the figure of Moses that we are going to encounter in our generation. We are a light, and there are other lights. I want to turn our attention from lights and other lights to light and shadow. I want to read to you a poem not by a religious figure, but by a secular Israeli poet named Yehuda Amichai, who died 15 years ago. Amichai was one of the great literary figures in Israeli culture in the last century. From the book of Esther, I filtered the sediment. From the book of Esther, I filtered the sediment of vulgar joy. And from the book of Jeremiah, the howl of pain in the guts. And from the Song of Songs, the endless search for love. And from the book of Genesis, the dreams and Cain. And from Ecclesiastes, the despair. And from the book of Job, Job. And with what was left, I pasted myself a new Bible. Now I live censored and pasted and limited and in peace, if that's what you can call it. A woman asked me last night on the dark street how another woman was who'd already died before her time and not in anyone else's time either. Out of a great wariness, I answered, she's fine. She's fine. Here's how I understand this poem. Amichai, like so many of us, understands that to be a part of a culture like Judaism, Christianity, or Islam means to be engaged exegetically with texts and traditions across space and time, some of which feel immediately like they are resonant and that they support and inspire. And then there are some other ones. And when you encounter those texts and traditions, you have a choice. One choice is, of course, to cut and paste in whatever ways you do that, literally or otherwise, so that what you have remaining of your Bible or of your Quran are all of those edifying texts which allow you to open it and always feel good about what those sources say in light of your own understanding of reality. But he warns, if you try and live that way textually, if that is your hermeneutical principle through which you approach text, beware, because it can have a deadening effect on the way in which you live your life, which of course is also a textual and interpretive process. So that if you come across a person in the street and they ask you, how is so-and-so? And the most you or they can say is, she's fine, in the face of trauma, in the face of the fact that this person has died prematurely. In the same way, he's beckoning us back to the book of Job, back to the book of Jeremiah, back to the book of Esther. By the way, just to use the book of Esther as an example, part of what's vulgar about it from his perspective is at the end of the story, when Esther and Mordecai manage to redeem the people, they send out a proclamation in which they tell their own people to take revenge on those that would have killed them. And Amichai is asking, what do we do with this? Well, part of what we need to do, I think, in each of our houses of worship and study, and then, if and when we have enough trust together, to actually look at some of those sources, as painful as they are, and ask in real ways, do these texts, do these traditions, do these rituals impact the ways in which Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are being lived? And if so, what are we going to do about it? The answer is not going to be to cut and paste so that everything across thousands of years is neat and tidy. But we need to be responsive. And so, as Rabbi, you said earlier, it's not just give me that old-time religion. But it is real engagement, including with the materials that are painful. What are we quoting when we give divrei Torah, words of Torah on Shabbat? Or when we are sermonizing or teaching Sunday school? Right? Or in our masjid? And what is the impact of those sources on us and on the people that we are serving? The next point that I want to raise is about sacred companionship. Thus far, I've talked about theological humility and creativity, about lights of the nations, about light and shadow, right? 3 principles I think that are important for me in engaging interreligiously. And the 4th is sacred companionship. I want to share with you a text that is perhaps one of the most well-known in the rabbinic tradition. And it goes like this. For 3 years, there was a dispute between the academies of Hillel and Shammai. Of course, it's a group of rabbis. The former asserting, the law is in agreement with our views, and the latter contending, the law is in agreement with our views. Then, a heavenly voice announced, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. Adding, but the law is in agreement with the rulings of the house of Hillel. Pause. Don't read on. At this point, I hope you're gesturing in some way with some degree of confusion. So, one of the prototypical rabbinic pairs, companions in the Talmud that we learn about, are Hillel and Shammai. And then each of them has an academy. And those students follow in the ways of their teachers. And so, in this case, they are going back and forth for 3 years about a particular issue, which they consider to be of great consequence. Lo and behold, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and these, the heavenly voice announces. But then the law is like the house of Hillel. So the redactor of the story has to ask, why? Since both are the words of the living God, what entitled the members of Beit Hillel, Beit simply means house, Beit Hillel, to have the law fixed according to their rulings? Listen to the answer. Because they were kindly and modest. They studied their own rulings and those of their opponents, and were even so humble as to mention the words of Beit Shammai before their own. This requires some unpacking. It's a classic for a good reason. First of all, what I want to point out is that the houses of Hillel and Shammai, as I said before, believe that they're involved in an argument for what the rabbis call l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So don't be misled. These rabbis aren't arguing in a kind of pedantic way about a law. They really believe that if you're going to be in covenantal relationship with God and you're going to live an upright Jewish spiritual life, that you need to be guided by halakha. And they, as the leaders of the community, need to try and do their very best to set the rulings in the proper way. And they reach a standstill. There is a machloket, which means a disagreement. And again, we see the role of humility here. There is a divine voice that is greater than either academy. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of England, said, God is greater than religion. And there's more to say about this text, which is for a community to be a living community, beyond all of the intellectual conversation, beyond all of the heartfelt debate, you have to make a decision. You have to live. And so the law, more often than not, was set according to the house of Hillel. And you see why. Very simple but profound reasons. They were kindly and modest. They studied their own rulings and those of the house of Shammai. Pause. How often do we actually study the materials of people that are different from us, let alone those that we disagree with? And this point is applicable not only to the religious realm, but to other realms as well. To make a specific religious point, I would say we suffer today from great religious illiteracy. We know so little about what animates the beliefs and ideas of other people that it's much easier, right, just to shout that they're wrong. So they studied the opinions of their opponents, and then they actually articulated those opinions and said them before their own. And in my estimation, what that means is that they try to offer the best rendering of that argument and then to demonstrate why they think it's wrong. For me, religious pluralism does not mean that we efface difference. There has to be a certain kind of textured particularism that we live into. But it's accompanied by what Sacks calls the dignity of difference. My own teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who died last summer, was a pioneer in the interreligious realm, as some of you know, in this country. And the way that he spoke about interreligious engagement was to use the following metaphor. He said that we might think about the planet as a living organism, which I think is a powerful metaphor in our context. And yes, he was influenced by Gaian thinking. He said, if that is the case, then we need all of the organs of this body to function at their healthiest. And one way to think about the different religions of the world is to think about them as each being a vital organ. And so they have their own structure and integrity, but they are permeable. They are in communication. They share nutrients. And he said, what we're trying to do, of course, is divinize this body of life. Right? It's a very powerful image about an understanding of life as a whole, as a living organism, and the religions of the world, each playing a distinctive role, while understanding that we are interconnected in ways that are integral to the health of life as a whole. Shared companionship. Here's another piece, though, that's important to say in reclaiming this text, because it's a part of light and shadow. The rabbis that composed this text centuries ago could have never imagined that I'd be standing before you, mostly Methodists, at Lake Junaluska in 2015, sharing with you a text about an internal discussion among the rabbis about the importance of machloket and applying it to interfaith relations. So I think that I have not only the right but the responsibility to do that. That is to say, again, to quote my teacher, what I think we all need to be involved with is the renewal of our traditions. Reb Zalman liked to say, our task is to live on the growing edge of Judaism. He didn't like the expression the cutting edge. He said, feh. You know, that's Yiddish for a thumbs down. Feh. Who would want to cut themselves off from the Tanakh, from the Talmud, from the Rambam, from Maimonides, from the Zohar, from the Baal Shem Tov, right? And he used the image again of a natural scene, of a tree. To live on the growing edge means that you are fed and nourished deep from within the roots of a tradition, but as the tree grows, it needs to reach out and be in contact with all that is around it. And of course, that experience of engagement is as vital to the health of the tree as are the roots. So we're seeking to live on the growing edge, not on the cutting edge. So when I reread this text, I read it out of its original context, but I believe very strongly that this is one of the gifts of the tradition which I must share with other people, because it articulates to me something that's vital, not only in terms of Jewish living, but planetary living, which is Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. None of us has hold of ultimate truth. If we did, we would be God. And at the same time, we have real ideas and opinions that matter. Part of what is so powerful about this text is it's a story about resilience in relationship. 3 years. They cared enough not only about the issues at hand, but about each other to remain in conversation for 3 years. In my experience in interreligious work, in the name of tolerance, in the name of pluralism, in the name of peace, one of the most significant elements of actually doing the work and not only theorizing about it is making a decision that you're going to enter into relationships and you're going to help to nurture those relationships in good times and in challenging times. One of the most powerful experiences for me as a Jewish person over the last decade has been teaching at Hebrew College, where every day I have the opportunity to engage in a pluralistic Jewish school with people from different walks of Jewish belief and practice, and then located side by side on that hilltop, as some of you know, is Andover Newton Theological School. And we together have made a decision that we're going to be in relationship. And the model that we use oftentimes is that of a chavruta, that is a sacred companion, individually and institutionally. We are companions, companions that are going to agree and disagree. And there have been plenty of moments of both, especially every time there's a flare-up in the Middle East or in some other part of the world where we are trying to do something to be helpful and feel mostly futile. And so there's a lot of emotion that spills over. But sacred companionship, walking the walk, is as important as anything else I could possibly say. And if it sounds prosaic, I apologize. But any of you that have been involved in this work, you know it in your bones. So the last thing that I want to share with you is a poem by Marge Piercy. I share it both for its content, because Piercy, to my mind, is a profound poet, but I also recognize that in weaving together these texts, there are far more texts from men from centuries past than from men and women in the present. And that too also has to be a part of the process of renewal. We need to engender our traditions, as you were saying earlier, for the sake of all of us. So here is Piercy. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm, when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. So in my closing remarks to you this afternoon, I want to bless us all that we have the inspiration and the fortitude to take in as much as we can this weekend from each other, to spend time in meaningful conversation and reflection, and then go back out to the worlds in which we live and work, roll up our sleeves, and do the work that must be done. One of the texts that I didn't read here is from Dr. King, and you can peruse it, and some of you may be familiar with it. But the image that he uses is of a world house. We live in a world house, he says. And so each and every one of us has a role to play in building the architecture of that house. And in Jewish terminology, as Phil suggested in his opening, that project is one we call tikkun. It's about building and mending and healing, each of us bringing to the task the best that we have to offer. So thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you these thoughts and these sources. I'm happy to take a few questions, and then happy to continue conversation over meals during the rest of the weekend. Thank you.